What's up, guys? Run the Gauntlet's Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Justin Alfiero. Shortly, you will be hearing a voice. The man behind that voice is Jimmy LeBeau. NFL trade deadline just passed. We want to talk about that. We want to talk about your fantasy football trade deadline. And then on top of that, we're going to have somewhat of a condensed version of start-sits, considering we have 6 bye weeks this week. And that'll be everything for this show, guys. Enjoy.
Welcome back to the show, guys. Week 8 is in the books, going forward now into Week 9. Week 8 also brought about one really massive development, which is the trade deadline, as well as marking the halfway point for over half the NFL of games played, which means fantasy football for a lot of players is over halfway done. I don't know, man. A couple leagues I'm feeling pretty good, a couple leagues I'm not feeling all too good. So this week is really pivotal for a lot of people to win. And that also applies to the regular NFL, teams and trying to win divisions and go compete for a Super Bowl.
Yeah, and a lot of times as well, the second half of the year is when the real studs on the team start to have their games, because now you're really needing to win games. And a lot of times teams lean on their bigger guys more.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because a lot of teams that I felt were right away from being Super Bowl contenders made a couple trades before the deadline that really put them over the top. I was going to start with Demaryius Thomas going to the Houston Texans. I think that is potential wide receiver 1 all the way through for the rest of the season, starting this week versus guess who? The Denver Broncos.
Yeah, I mean, that's good stuff. Deshaun Watson's been really good this year, too. Better than Case Keenum, may I add, and he hasn't even had Demaryius Thomas. Here's the thing, is that Deshaun Watson's throwing for 272 yards per game, which is actually relatively modest. Not bad by any means, but modest.
That's what two does.
If he had Demaryius Thomas this year, I think that number would be much closer to 300 yards per game. Watson has 15 touchdowns. That's more than Drew Brees, Ben Roethlisberger, Matt Stafford. He's tied with Matt Ryan. He's playing as good as anybody this year. And with Demaryius Thomas, as a Colts fan, I hate to say it, watch out for this Texans squad. This is a real problem here. Demaryius Thomas just got a huge uptick in fantasy value.
It's a shame because Will Fuller tore his ACL. And Will Fuller was on a tear this year.
Yeah.
But the Houston Texans and their wide receiver room has changed dramatically for fantasy and real-life perspective. Another person I think people are going to sleep on coming out of that receiver room is Keke.
Yeah, I agree.
Because I don't think his value changes at all. He's still the third receiver. It's just the second receiver is now not Will Fuller.
Yeah, which I guess may work against him, but it could also work for him. I mean, listen, those are... Obviously, Demaryius Thomas and DeAndre Hopkins, off the top of my head, if I'm just going to think real fast, has to be amongst one of the best wide receiver tandems in the league, right? There's not many better than that, if there's anything.
Not even close.
So, teams are going to plan for that. Keke, they know he exists, but at a certain point, what else can you do but let Keke beat you and not Demaryius Thomas or DeAndre Hopkins? That's very possible as well. Demaryius Thomas, I think, is going to have weeks where he's better than DeAndre Hopkins as well. I don't think Hopkins takes a knock in the sense that you wouldn't want him. But maybe he's just not proverbial wide receiver 1 every week.
Oh, he absolutely is.
I don't know. Demaryius Thomas, there's only so many numbers to be had potentially. I'm not saying you don't start DeAndre Hopkins every week, but what I'm saying is that maybe he's not quite. Maybe this takes him out of that, top 3 guys. You know what I'm saying?
It could. I think you have the opposite.
Maybe it knocks him to 6 or something like that.
See, I think DeAndre Hopkins also benefits from this trade.
I mean, he does, potentially, but also perhaps not. Again, Demaryius Thomas, I think, is the same guy, for the most part, that we saw a few years ago with Peyton Manning. The last time he's had a quarterback that has played good.
Right.
So, I mean, we've talked about DT. I think a more interesting one, a little more nuanced, is Golden Tate. They have a bye week this week. They just traded a third-round pick, the Eagles, for Golden Tate. What do you think of this?
I think Philadelphia is a perfect scheme fit for Golden Tate.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you put Golden Tate on most teams in the NFL, the Eagles would be pretty high on that list in terms of a perfect situation for him. I think with Cleveland's RPO-driven offense and how much they really rely on just short passes, set up long passes, Golden Tate will thrive in Philadelphia. Will he be any more than a wide receiver 2 in PPR still? Which is basically what he is in PPR.
Yeah.
I think maybe he downgrades to a 3 and standard kind of remains where he is. I don't think we'll see his yardage necessarily drop, It'll just be, I don't know if he'll get peppered with targets the same way by Wentz right away.
Yeah, well, luckily for his fantasy value, or at least the optimism of his fantasy value, would be that they do have a bye week this week. And that gives them a full week without playing a game to try to integrate Golden Tate into the offense. Here's the thing, is that they have established weapons on the team, so Golden Tate's going to have to fit into the Eagles. The Eagles aren't going to try to work around Golden Tate. This basically kills Nelson Aguilar. As a side note, he was holding relevance in PPR leagues still, even though he hasn't played particularly well this year. But I'd imagine after the bye week, his role will be diminished to something that is probably worthy of dropping to your free agency.
Ooh, really?
Most likely, yeah. I'm not going to say do it now, but I say after that game, it's most likely that you're going to be doing that if you own Nelson Aguilar. The problem here with Golden Tate as far as his fantasy value going forward is that he has a proven repertoire with Matt Stafford, and they have great communication. I'm not saying there's not potential for that with Wentz, but having Matt Stafford had a very good connection, so I think there might be a quick adjustment here. Maybe it won't happen at all, but I would expect the adjustment. If I had to say his value went up or went down, I would say it went down just a little bit, like you said.
The third player that was traded, Amari Cooper. This was slightly earlier. That's actually last week, but we didn't cover it because of the time in which we recorded the show. Amari Cooper to the Dallas Cowboys for a first-round draft pick. See, that's the kicker in this. I thought for Dallas' sake, this helps Dak Prescott, this helps Ezekiel Elliott, and this helps Amari Cooper. But this kills the Cowboys. Amari Cooper has the potential to be a perennial all-pro wide receiver in the National Football League. However, with a quarterback like Dak Prescott that's not the most accurate quarterback in the world, who's not the most likely to throw him open, I think Amari Cooper needs to be in a better offense to reach that potential. I don't think Dallas is that, number one. And number two, with injury history and mileage in the NFL, I don't think Amari Cooper is worth a first-round draft pick.
I don't think so either. I was stunned, actually, that that's what had been given up for Amari Cooper.
Yeah, unbelievably so.
And the thing with it is that it's a hard one to predict because he clearly just got put into a situation where Dallas is going to try to use him as the number one receiver. I don't think they have enough outside of Amari Cooper for this to be consistent, man. I really don't. Amari Cooper's very, very, very talented. I think just like you said, he has the talent to become an all-pro in this league year in and year out. It's just I'm so used to seeing the talent not come to fruition, come to numbers with Amari Cooper that I can't view Dallas as a better situation, honestly. In fact, I could see him being used as more of a distraction.
Let me give a scenario for you.
Mm-hmm.
Monday Night Football.
Yeah.
Coming off a bye week and 2 weeks off. Do you think Amari Cooper is a must-start this week against the Tennessee Titans at home? First game in Jerry's world. 2 weeks off because he had the Raiders bye week and the Cowboys bye week to learn the playbook and develop a chemistry with Dak Prescott. I'm of the opinion that he is a must-start this week. I wanted to ask you about that.
I don't think he's a must-start this week at all. I think you're better off in that offense. It's not like he just got traded to trying to think of a team in which he would just be guaranteed the points. He didn't get traded to one of those situations in which he just guaranteed the points. I think the Cowboys, I think it's going to take a second. Amari Cooper, I generally don't think is really... They're different types of receivers, but as an overall product, I don't think he's that much better than Dez Bryant just was last year. And I don't think it's just going to happen overnight with him and Prescott. I don't think he's a must-start. I'd rather wait and see with Cooper.
So seeing these NFL teams make these moves, now I've also noticed it's an interesting time in fantasy football where fantasy football owners are equally as desperate as NFL franchises, that they're trying to save their season. And while we're not trying to save our jobs, we're certainly trying to save our pride.
Yeah.
When you're 3-5 and it's week 9 and your team is not that far off, you get a little risky around the fantasy trade deadline. And this is totally the opportunity for a lot of people to change their seasons. And just a couple philosophical points I wanted to highlight, as well as a couple players that I wanted to highlight that would really that are really something worth targeting in this time of the year. I think Demaryius Thomas is one of these players.
I agree.
You want to target players with a little bit of unknown to them, and I know that's ridiculous. Would you want to trade for a known commodity? The answer is it depends on your team. But in an ideal world right now, if you're 500, you should be able to get away with one or two more players being out for 2 weeks. You know what I'm saying? Like, you should be able to survive that. And at that point, after this stretch of bye weeks, your depth does not mean as much as it did for the past month and a half. You've got to start thinking about perfecting your starting lineup. A couple of the players that I look at that really fit into that mold of, like, you want to put together the perfect stretch run team would be Demaryius Thomas, Le'Veon Bell, and Leonard Fournette.
Yeah, Leonard Fournette's an interesting one. You have some big names in there. I agree on Demaryius Thomas, so I think we can start here. Not only does he win, but one of his former teammates in the Broncos wins as well. But Demaryius Thomas wins here. I'd imagine that most people are expecting Demaryius Thomas to do well in Houston, and I imagine most people value him more than they did prior. But maybe not. Maybe they value him the same. I think he's definitely a guy to trade for if you have some extra value on the team. Maybe if one of the guys in your league perhaps is in a bad spot and has Demaryius Thomas on his roster, you could almost overpay for Demaryius Thomas and kind of pitch to the guy like, hey, you need all of this while you're technically getting the best player in the trade. Demaryius Thomas is definitely someone to trade for, in my opinion, as well.
Yeah, 100%.
And while I'm at it, I had mentioned his former teammate, Courtland Sutton, I think you should trade for right now. I could get into it later. I'm not huge on Courtland Sutton this week, but he's a super talented rookie. Remember when we did the rookie rankings, he popped off in film. When I was looking at his film, I watched a few games by him, at least 3. He popped off the camera. My only problem with him was that Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders was there. Well, guess what? Now it's him and Emmanuel Sanders. They obviously felt okay with trading Demaryius Thomas because of Courtland Sutton. It has everything to do with Courtland Sutton. This guy's on the rise. This could be a league winner, potentially, Courtland Sutton.
Yeah, 100% he was available in 88% of Yahoo leagues coming into this week. I do not know what his waiver percentage was this week, but I'm sure it was probably close to 70 or 60%. Mm-hmm. So if you weren't lucky enough to pick him up off waivers, your best bet is to make a trade for him, and if you could do that, you're in good shape.
I think you could still buy him relatively low at that, and I think he has a lot more upside than most likely the guy who has him is going to give him credit for.
Yeah, 100%. You could steal that. Yeah, so Leonard Fournette.
Mm-hmm.
Who had an opinion on him? My thing with Leonard Fournette is if he comes back week 10, you are basically guaranteeing yourself a 10-plus point back going down the stretch of football. Yeah, I don't think... Here's the thing, Leonard Fournette, and I was right about this with Rob Gronkowski last year. The games Leonard Fournette is missing right now are probably games Leonard Fournette can play. I don't think he's that severely injured.
You don't think, though, that the Jaguars flustering the way they are wouldn't play Leonard Fournette if he could play?
They might just be shutting him down, man.
You think they would have traded for Carlos Hyde if they thought he could play? I don't know, man. I don't think the signs point to that.
Here's the thing with the Carlos Hyde. The Carlos Hyde trade was insurance. If Leonard Fournette comes back in week 9, week 10, like they're saying, Leonard Fournette is fine. If you don't have to give up too much at the waiver wire, at the trade deadline, I think you should do that.
I'd actually be on the opposite end of this. I wouldn't give him away for a bag of peanuts. But I would have no problem taking production now that may be less than Leonard Fournette's upside just to have something. I was skeptical from the start of the year that Leonard Fournette would stay healthy this year, and it's kind of just my gut at this point. I don't trust it at all. I think they have a bad feeling about this Leonard Fournette injury. I think it's going to linger all year. When he comes back, he still has to get into game form, and that's if he stays healthy in that time. I think there's a lot of risk here on a huge name, and I think you're better off selling him. Someone else I think you should be selling, by the way, is Adrian Peterson. He is I didn't even realize, I'll be 100% honest with you. Obviously, he just had this huge week. I didn't realize before this week he had 149 yards. He had a 99-yard rushing game and a 97-yard rushing game. The odds that he continues that level of production, slim to none. We can only play the percentages, right?
Yeah.
As the season wanes on, and if the Redskins are winning football games like they are right now, I think he's going to wear down a little bit. And I think if they want to make a playoff run, they need Adrian Peterson. I think they're probably going to want to keep him fresh. And I think at some point they're going to take the workload off of Adrian Peterson if they're winning games. I'd sell him now. I think he just put together a really good 3-game stretch, probably better than any 3-game stretch he's going to put together for the rest of the season in terms of yardage. And I would sell him high while you can.
Yeah. I think with AP is that he's consistent production. Like I don't think his floor falls off. Like he's just as likely now. Apparently, he can have that 38-pointer. I didn't think it was going to happen this year.
I think he has plenty left in the tank.
But do you still think in PPR he'll be that 10-point guy?
Well, I would rather trade him away and take a chance on someone than to keep him. I'll be honest.
I don't know, because I feel like he's still like the consistency, you know. And I wouldn't want to cut bait on AP too quickly, but I see why you make that argument.
He just has to work a lot for his points. He doesn't catch him out of the backfield often enough at all.
Nah, that's true. But I think his upside of 100 yards rushing and a touchdown is something we should all be interested in, especially against the Falcons, the Buccaneers, and the Texans coming up.
I think he may have a game flow problem versus teams like the Falcons. And I was looking at.
Win, man.
I know they always win. I know they're going to try to keep Atlanta's offense off the field. I thoroughly believe that. And I'm not saying sit AP this week against the Falcons per se. What I'm saying is that as the season wanes on, I think you're smart to bet against him continuing to play the way he's playing.
Okay, that's fair. Another guy I like around this trade deadline here is Doug Baldwin. I like him as a buy low candidate. Because Russell Wilson is going to get this offense going. It's just what Russell Wilson does. Like, if we are going to sit here and try to fool ourselves into thinking that Russell Wilson is not going to lead these men that are the Seattle Seahawks.
We're already 4-3.
Exactly.
On a team that a lot of people thought were going to be terrible this year.
And let me list their matchups for you real fast.
Mm-hmm.
They're home for the Chargers. They're at the Rams, who have allowed 280 passing yards or more, including the Aaron Rodgers game, including last week. He had 290 and had 2 touchdowns. They've allowed 270 or more passing yards and 2 touchdowns to quarterbacks. So the Rams can't be taken in the secondary. Their defensive line
Plus, you're
is
trying
not
to keep
fair.
up with the Rams.
Exactly. So the game flow works in the favor. Then he's home versus the Packers. He goes to Carolina, which is an L. But he's home for San Francisco, home for Minnesota, at San Francisco, and home for Kansas City down the stretch.
Those are big matchups.
Oh, yeah. That is juicy when you have the Chiefs, the 49ers twice, the Chargers, and I hate to say it, the Rams, and the Packers. Doug Baldwin, Tyler Lockett, and while I don't necessarily like him, David Moore are all people you should be targeting down the stretch.
David Moore, even. All because of those 2 San Francisco matchups. Derek Carr this week, if we want to get into the starts at the quarterback position, I think you got to start Derek Carr this week. He played really well versus Indianapolis. Not that playing well versus Indianapolis is like an impossible feat, but they've actually been better against the pass this year than people expect. There was a lot working against Carr in that game with the trade of Amari Cooper, with Marshawn Lynch going down for the season. The 49ers are really not in the Raiders' class overall. Although they both have 1 win, I'd imagine Derek Carr isn't happy about that. 49ers defense is terrible. Josh Rosen last week had his best game of the year against this 49ers defense, which wasn't great, but it's worth noting. 252 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. If the Niners were to get blown out, that would completely screw up this start. But, I mean, the Raiders have allowed 27-plus points to every team they've versed this year, minus the Broncos in week 2.
Yeah.
So CJ Beathard has done good with good matchups before. I think this is a week that this is a close game, but I think that the Raiders are going to be able to put up a lot of points this week, and I think it's going to start with Derek Carr.
I agree with that, actually. I think he's definitely a nice quarterback streaming option this week. Another quarterback streamer that I'm a fan of, Mitch Trubisky. It's hard to even call him a streamer at this point.
Against the Bills?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He's one of these guys I look at as almost matchup proof for the past few weeks. He is right there in the top 8 in terms of highest scoring quarterbacks in fantasy football right now. As we currently stand this season, Mitch Trubisky in standard leagues is the 7th highest scoring quarterback in all of fantasy football. And that's with a bye week under his belt. He currently has more points in standard than Roethlisberger, Luck, Cousins, Goff, and Watson.
Does have a 6-touchdown week helping him out, but I understand.
But it never slowed down from there. That was his coming out party, bro. That's all that game was because 6 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns, 2 touchdowns later. He's still looking filthy. Mr. Trubisky is.
Yeah, and those 6 touchdowns were versus Tampa Bay, who Cam Newton is versing this week. I think you got to start Cam Newton. Last 4 games, quarterbacks versus Tampa Bay, we have Andy Dalton with 280 yards and 2 touchdowns. Mayfield put together his best complete game of the season. Not that it was a statistical masterpiece. 215 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions was pretty much his best game of the season when you include the win. Matt Ryan had 355 yards and 3 touchdowns, and Trubisky obviously had the 6 touchdown week. That's in the last 4 weeks. You get it? You start guys versus Tampa Bay. Carolina is way better than this team. I think you got to start Cam Newton this week against Tampa Bay.
Yeah. Absolutely. That is just a layup matchup every single week. Blake Bortles. You can't throw an interception on a bye week.
So start Blake Bortles is going to give you his best performance yet. Yeah, I have Jared Goff versus New Orleans. Finally, a game where Jared Goff has to throw the football. I think a lot of times his numbers are held back simply by the fact that the Rams
That just happened this week.
kick people's unit, and he did well. And he did very well. I think versus New Orleans, I think this is going to be the biggest threat so far this season. I mean, they just had one last week, but I think you have another situation this week in New Orleans where they're going to be fighting for that undefeated streak. Whether it happens or not, I'm not going to make a prediction on. The odds this isn't a high-scoring, competitive game are like next to none. And obviously, you start Drew Brees. We talk about this. So obviously, you start Drew Brees, but Jared Goff deserves respect in this matchup. Even if Todd Gurley has been ruling this offense, I think this is a week where they're probably going to be playing from behind for a decent portion of the game. And obviously, also, New Orleans is a hard place to play, so you know the Saints. You know the house is going to be rocking versus the Rams because all those Saints fans believe they're better than the New Orleans Rams.
Yeah.
The New Orleans Rams, the Los Angeles Rams. And I think what's important about this is I think New Orleans is going to come out strong. And I think that the Rams are going to be, I don't think they're going to have a chance to ever get Todd Gurley going in the running game consistently throughout the game. I think they're going to have to throw a lot. I predict the highest attempts for Jared Goff this season in this game.
That would be something, man. That would be a hell of a game. Because that's going back to the Minnesota game. That's his most recent really great game.
If you're done with starts, I'm going to go to Stits. I have Mariota versus Dallas. I don't know who's starting Mariota, but just in case you were waiting on him and you just think this might be the week because you don't think Dallas is good, don't do that. Cowboys are allowing 1.14 passing touchdowns per game, a.k.a. 1 touchdown per game to quarterbacks. Mariota has 3 passing touchdowns all season. It's not good over there. I don't dislike Mariota completely, but he's horribly inefficient. And I think if both teams had their way this week, they would just try to run the ball, control the clock, and just try to win that way. So I would not be starting Mariota, and then for the same reasons, I would not be starting Dak Prescott.
This week, I have Matt Ryan, believe it or not, as a sit.
Against Washington?
In Washington, that place is going to be rocking. The Falcons actually have a top 5 score defense in the NFL right now, and I think that's going to stop. They're going to, like you said, keep the Falcons off the field offensively.
That's in terms of scoring, top 5 defense?
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the tougher units to play, especially on the road. I get it's a must-win, so Matt Ryan's going to show up because that's what the great ones do.
But that doesn't technically mean statistical output, I'd imagine, is your point.
Yeah, 100%. Just because you win a game doesn't mean the numbers have to follow.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, typically I look for those ones to think they would, but not always the case. Oh yeah, just in case there was ever any doubt, starting Tom Brady and starting Aaron Rodgers and what promises to be one of
beyond the start sits, guys. I hope you're not like me and work Sunday night. Woof. That's great. That's good stuff. I'm gonna have to try to find a way to call out to watch that one or something.
Is this a Super Bowl preview?
If that is not a Super Bowl preview, I mean, what is at this point in the season? That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful game. I mean, you just don't see it enough, Tom Brady versus Aaron Rodgers. That's great stuff on Sunday Night Football. Another sit I have for this week after we oogle and ogle over Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers, who played better than both of them in the beginning of the season, was Ryan Fitzpatrick.
Yeah.
I have him as a sit this week. This can either go really good or really bad. There's just a lot of risk built in here with Ryan Fitzpatrick. We all know the start that the bearded one had this year. But chances are he's been benched for how many weeks now? At least 3, right?
Yeah.
You've probably figured out your quarterback situation without Ryan Fitzpatrick. And if I were to just go off my gut, I think you're better off using what you have in place and waiting this week to see if he's either Fitzmagic or Fitztragic. Remember, he was benched in the first half of that game. He had 126 yards and a pick through basically the whole first half. Most of the mid-tier to top-tier QBs have a solid matchup this week, so I just don't think it's necessary to start Ryan Fitzpatrick.
I understand. Just a little side note, one of the storylines going into this game before we start talking about the running backs and the wide receivers. Adam Thielen is playing the Minnesota Vikings in the game in which he would break Calvin Johnson's 100-yard game streak.
You mean the Detroit Lions?
Yes, they are playing the Detroit Lions.
Mm-hmm. So it's going to happen, is your point.
Some irony is there, Just interesting, man, because
Adam
Thielen is having that type of year. It's possible. Darius Slay is definitely going to be lining up on him the most, which opens up a lot of opportunities for my first start at the flex spot. It's not really a start because you have to start him, but Stephon Diggs. Like, if there has been a situation in which you have not been trusting this man, trust this man versus the Detroit Lions to give you what his name value suggests that you should be given every week.
Yeah, well, we told him to use him versus New Orleans last week. Obviously, that worked out really well. And you're saying go for it again this week. I'm not against it.
Detroit is a beautiful matchup for the second receiver.
While I'm not sure it's possible if both things come into fruition, you say Matt Ryan's a sit, but I say Calvin Ridley this week is a start. The Redskins are the number 29 defense against receivers lined up on the outside this year. 5 of Calvin Ridley's touchdowns have come on the outside, and it's where he's done most of his work. He has 18 receptions on 25 targets and 321 yards out there too. He's due. It's been 3 weeks since he's had a PPR game of 10-plus points. I think he's guaranteed for 10-plus points in PPR with upside for a heck of a lot more.
Yeah, that's fair. And one of my starts this week is Chris Carson versus the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers have allowed Duke Johnson, Deion Lewis, and Derrick Henry to have massive fantasy games in the past couple weeks. I think Chris Carson, through his sheer volume and the sheer timing, I'll say, of the Seattle Seahawks in a favorable home matchup versus the Chargers, Chris Carson is a good start this week at running back.
Revenge. That spells revenge. Brandon Cooks this week is versing the Saints in the game where Jared Goff is going to have his highest attempts of the season, like I said. 40 of Brandon Cooks' 51 targets have come from the outside this year. He's ranked 7th in the league in fantasy points when he's lined up on the outside, along with the fact that the Saints are the worst team in the league against receivers lined up on the outside. This is going to be easy for the pickings with Brandon Cooks. Much like Stephon Diggs, this is easy money at wide receiver this week, I think.
I like DJ Moore versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He is one of the better talents coming out of the NFL draft. I was wrong during our rookie rankings. I was very wrong on DJ Moore. There aren't too many players on the Carolina Panthers that can do what he does. He brings something to that offense that everyone outside of Devin Funchess, Christian McCaffrey, and Greg Olsen do not. Not including Cam Newton, because he's the quarterback.
Yeah.
The man had 90 yards receiving on 5 receptions, as well as 39 yards rushing last week. 129 yards all-purpose is an absolute breakout by Carolina Panthers wide receiver standards.
I agree with that.
They're just going to feed the hot hands with this one, man. They invested a first-round pick in DJ Moore versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers divisional matchup. DJ Moore's going to have a day.
How about Marvin Jones versus Minnesota? The matchup isn't that good on paper, but the reason I feel the need to stress him as a start this week is that going forward, he is a must-start. Without Golden Tate, I think he's generally matchup-proof in terms of the way you should trust him. He was the number 4 wide receiver in fantasy last year without Kenny Golladay being as involved as he was. Now that these Golden Tate targets have freed up, you got to start Marvin Jones every week with confidence. Starts this week in Minnesota.
Same as Golladay, but particularly for Marvin Jones because this was like the number 2 or 3 wide receiver in standard last season. He has just been disappointing as all hell.
Number 4, actually.
Number 4?
I think I had mentioned that. I had meant to mention that, but
like his upside is absolutely phenomenal, and every single week you should be writing that. My thing, especially if he finds himself lines up across from Xavier Rhodes, expect one of those vintage Marvin Jones touchdown plays. Because Xavier Rhodes has shown he does not have the home run breakaway speed that some of these receivers has.
Sticking in that game, I think you should also be starting Latavius Murray. Detroit's allowing 136 rushing yards per game in the NFL, and that was with Damon Harrison last week. They still allowed 105 to Chris Carson. Until this team shows improvement against the run, you just have to take every running back versus them. It's bad.
Well, 100%. It's just they also got Snacks Harrison, so that kind of improves their run defense.
But what I just said last week, even with Damon Harrison there, who led the team in tackles, 105 yards to Chris Carson. Until they show it, don't respect it.
Yeah, especially against the Vikings.
He can't stop the run by himself.
No. You know who else I kind of like this week?
Who?
Devontae Booker for his Freeman sets.
Okay.
He had a pretty impressive game last week. Had over 10 touches. And was pretty efficient in all of them. And I feel like versus Houston, he has a chance there because Denver's going to be home for that game. And if they're going to do anything without Demaryius Thomas, it's going to be Emmanuel Sanders in the running game offensively.
I like Lamar Miller in that game versus Denver. It's rough with all the buys this week, but Miller figures to benefit from the likely uptick in offensive production that they're going to get with Demaryius Thomas. I think with more opportunities to score potentially and a below-average run defense in Denver, it's just about as good of a reason to start someone as anyone else or anything else.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, then I'll mention Kenyon Drake.
You like him against the Jets?
I do. I think as an asset in both the running game and the passing game, Drake has worked himself into being reliable to some degree once more. I think the Jets are the type of team that bad things happen to. I'm going to be 100% honest.
Yeah, they are.
2 straight 20-plus point PPR games for Drake, and while the Jets aren't a great matchup on paper, they're relatively average at best, and I think Drake's trending upwards. I think it's a good week to start Kenyon Drake versus the Jets.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Definitely one of the Dolphins running backs is going to find the end zone at home.
How about the Jets? How about sits?
One more start before we go there.
Mm-hmm.
Jalen Richard on Thursday Night Football versus the 49ers.
Okay.
PPR gold, not madness.
Can't argue that, actually.
This is as reliable in PPR as it gets. Sits, I have Aaron Jones versus the Patriots.
You're on the sit Aaron Jones every week bandwagon.
Yeah, don't trust that. So they just called up a dude from their practice squad after they lost Clinton Dix. He's 5'11", 230 pounds. He's going to take some of the goal line work away from Aaron Jones. That's just what the Packers do. Right when it's about to be figured out. Let's throw a wrench at it.
You had him as a start before, but I'm actually going to say to sit Chris Carson versus San Diego. You brought up some good points. He played well last week, and he's played well in general. I'm just predicting a shootout. I think there's going to be a lot of throwing in this game, and I think Carson's going to get carries, but I think if he doesn't have a big play, there's going to be limited production for Chris Carson, at least in standard leagues this week.
That's fair. I have Peyton Barber as a sit.
Every week?
No, mostly just because of Carolina. Peyton Barber and Ronald Jones are both sits. Can't trust either of those against a really game Carolina Panthers run defense. I'm not going to put Nick Chubb here, but I'm staying away from the Cleveland Browns this week. And Nick Chubb is probably the most relevant fantasy player on the team outside of Jarvis Landry. And listen, Greg Williams is the head coach now. It's only Baker Mayfield's, fifth start? He already just lost his first head coach and offensive coordinator.
It's a rough time.
Yeah, typical Brownie shit.
Rough times in Cleveland, as per usual. I think you should be sitting LeSean McCoy versus the Bears this week. I think you just got to give up on the Bills' offense. It's terrible. It's just god-awful.
Yeah, Nathan Peterman is playing quarterback once again.
Don't need analytics to say it. They might start Terrell Pryor this week. Bears' defense is very good, along with that. And LeSean McCoy does not have a rushing touchdown yet this season. I would expect it to continue against the Bears. I think they're in trouble this week.
Yeah, definitely 100%. They sit Alex Collins versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. usually Ravens running backs come to play in that heated rivalry game, especially when the only thing that separates these two teams in the standings is a Pittsburgh loss. Because if Pittsburgh loses, they're 4-3-1, and if Baltimore wins, they're 5-4-0. Thus, Baltimore would be first place in the division. Well, no, they'd be second, rather, it's Cincinnati.
Yeah.
My mistake. And that is just critical.
I agree. I think you should be sitting Tevin Coleman versus Washington. While Coleman was startable last week, as I predicted, he actually barely worked. Washington has been a nice, stout defense this year. I have a feeling they're going to try to control the pace of this game. I think Atlanta's going to be better off throwing more often than not against the Washington Redskins, and I don't figure Coleman to have much yardage in general, but obviously a touchdown can always save a bad day if you have to start.
Yep. You're 100% right with Tevin Coleman. I'm not high on him. I'm not low on him.
Those are all my sits for running backs, by the way.
Yeah, I'm looking at about the same boat.
All right, then I'm going to move to a wide receiver, Corey Davis. This is disappointing. I was really high on Corey Davis at some point, but he has become a victim of Marcus Mariota's inefficiencies and inconsistency. Marcus Mariota hasn't been able to throw many touchdowns this year. Corey Davis is probably a safe sit just about every week going forward until further notice. That starts this week in Dallas. I'm pretty much staying away from this game in fantasy in general.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right about that. It's good. That is a dead one.
Along with him, a little more controversial perhaps, if Cooper Kupp were to play this week, which is to some degree expected, I would wait on Cooper Kupp. I'd sit him this week if you can. Play a matchup. I think this week is Brandon Cook's week to shine. Kupp obviously has relevance in PPR leagues, but I don't expect much more than that. And to cap off my sits, Cortland Sutton versus the Texans, even though I said you should be trading for him. The Texans are an extremely talented secondary. In case Keenum has not been great, it's going to be an adjustment. Without
Really?
Demaryius Thomas, I think so. And honestly, I'm expecting the Broncos to get smacked this week. While I think Cortland Sutton is an excellent guy to trade for again, I wouldn't be surprised if he played well this week, but I just would not play him this week.
Yeah, it's fair. I'm saying sit Willie Snead against the Pittsburgh Steelers. There's nothing necessarily against Willie Snead. I think he's actually having a very efficient year. It's just that divisional games and rivalry games like that scare me because you never know what's going to happen. Teams to pull out stops where it's about winning games, and fantasy is completely ignored because they're not thinking about, let's work for a number. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's work certain guys. This is when you'll see some layers. A game like this, because number one, they're trying to hide what they're going to do in the playoffs. And number two, they don't want as much film on the things they're going to give the Steelers looks on.
And you think Willie Snead specifically is going to be the guy that...
Yeah, because it's not going to be John Brown. He's too important to the offense. And the Ravens run their offense through the tight ends. Willie Snead will get decent numbers in PPR. I just think against the Pittsburgh Steelers defense and just the matchup in general, I think divisional matchups are always pretty universally bad for fantasy.
And on that note, guys, we tried our best on this tough week with 6 bye weeks. So we were just trying to kind of sort out some of the guys that were there, not always the best players in the world, not as many names to talk about, but we tried to sort it out for you guys. We're working in partnership with the Game Changer Sports Network. We are Run the Gauntlet Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Justin Alfiero.
Jimmy LeBeau.
And we are out. Good luck this week, guys.